Okay, the recording is now in progress. This is Roaming Free Inside the Cage, William Schafer, episode 35, I believe. We're going to be starting right at the top of chapter 5 tonight, starting at page 81. And we're going to be looking at types 5, 8, and 2. So the next triangle, he's taking these in three sets of triangles. Um, so who I am identifying as a 5. So any other 5s? I think Ellen, is she still with us? Ellen's 5. Okay. Any other 5s? And really just 2.
Five is
Oh,
most,
Lori.
right?
Yeah, Lori's here. Okay, so we've got 3 5s to kick around tonight. And this will be interesting
Please
to
don't.
see if as I was reading through this, I was getting some resonances and some hits. So I can definitely start to see maybe a little more five-ishness in me, although maybe not for the same reasons that he was stating. But I have to probably think more deeply about it and be more ruthlessly honest with myself as we go forward. But let's go ahead and dig in and see what we can uncover here. The traditional manner of presenting the remaining 6 types is to follow the order of the Enneagram's irregular hexagon: 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, and 7. For reasons that will become clearer as we go, I'm not going to do that. Instead, I will next describe the types forming the equilateral triangle of 5, 2, and 8. And in the following chapter, present the last triangle comprised of types 4, 7, and 1. Although this is not the currently familiar manner of rendering the Enneagram, once one is aware of the yin, yang, and reconciling energetic aspects of the 9 types, it quickly becomes apparent that the equilateral triangles formed by types 5, 8, and 2, and by types 4, 7, and 1 are structurally identical to the inner triangle formed by types 9, 6, and 3. Each triangle contains one member in each center of experience. Okay, so that would be mind, heart, and body, right? One that is unbalanced yin, one that is unbalanced yang, and one that is unbalanced reconciling. As these 3 triangles come more closely into focus, some very interesting relationships will appear. Okay, so he's just giving us the rationale for the way that he's presenting the types here. So now let's dig into type 5. So the holy idea for type 5 is omniscience and transparency, and those have very specialized definitions, and he'll get into those. The life energy of any type 5, like that of 9, is unbalanced toward yin. At first, this might seem strange to those of you who are not 5s. From the outside, 5s can seem so withdrawn and socially isolated that it is hard to see how they can be yin. But this is only because many people limit their understanding of yin energy to receptivity in the arena of social relationships. The 5 is extremely receptive and yin, but in the mental arena rather than the social. If you doubt this, just watch a 5 open a book. To a 5, a book is a sacred object to be absorbed whole in its entirety. The Enneagram tradition describes the holy idea of type 5 with 2 names: holy omniscience and holy transparency. Holy omniscience refers to the spiritual intuition that everything is an expression of one original awareness. Now, it's interesting, just last night we were talking about consciousness in basically the same way, right? Is there one overarching consciousness from which we all emanate, from which we all are expressions, if you will, or manifestations? And even we went so far as to say, are our brains actually transmitters of consciousness or receivers of consciousness? In other words, does consciousness um, originate with us as soon as our brains are of sufficient development? Or when our brains are of sufficient development, are we able to receive the consciousness? Interesting questions, and we're not going to answer them here. But this holy omniscience refers to the spiritual intuition that everything is an expression of one original awareness. That's running along the same lines. Now, holy transparency refers to the perception that every individual being is totally and completely illuminated by that same awareness. Enneatype 5, like its neighbor 6, is one of the mental types. But unlike 6, whose energy is reconciling, the energy of the 5 is yin. Its mental way of processing experience is to merge with whatever is known, and that gives the knowledge of type 5 an interior perspective. I didn't read that very well. Let's try again. Its mental way of processing experience is to merge with whatever is known, and that gives the knowledge of type 5 it's an interior perspective. A 5 knows not so much by analyzing and dissecting, but by joining with the known object, perceiving it as though the 5 were on the inside looking out. So we're talking about the concepts between, or looking at experience as not a concept here of something that we can understand cognitively as a concept in abstraction, but as an experience of the process itself. Frank Herbert and Dune had that great quote where he said, a process cannot be understood by stopping the process. You have to join the flow of the process if you want to understand the process. And so that's kind of what's happening here. The mental way of the 5 is to merge with the process, merge with what is known, and that gives that knowledge and interior perspective. The 5 knows not so much by analyzing and dissecting, but by joining with the known object, perceiving it as though the 5 are on the inside looking out. So omniscience in this context, therefore, does not mean knowing everything about everything. It means knowing whatever is known totally from the inside. This is very similar to the classical Chinese notion of Ming, which is to illuminate. To illuminate is not the same as to know. Knowing, Ji, is accomplished by the Shin or the heart mind and results in knowledge derived from principles and concepts. So that's the type of knowledge that we're familiar with in the West, right?
Mhm.
So this Shin, heart mind, is knowledge derived from principles and concepts. But in order to Ming is to know something concretely in its individuality. The word Ming can mean bright, as in bright object, insightful, or as in insightful observer, and most fundamentally, both at once, as in a well-illumined situation. Ming is what happens whenever one accesses the pivot of Tao. As we shall see later on, the great Taoist sage Zhuangzi uses Ming somewhat humorously to mean following the obvious, or at least his translator did. So here, this idea of Ming is going to be very similar to what Jesus says when he says, depart from me, I never knew you. Remember
Mm.
that situation?
Yeah.
Lord, Lord, let us into the kingdom. And he said, wait a minute. I don't know you. But hey, well, wait a minute. We built 24/7 satellite networks for you, and we cast out demons, and we did this and we did that. So those are the two different types of knowledge that we're talking about here, or activity. One that is conceptually based, one that is task oriented. It's object based, subject object. But what Jesus says, I never knew you, we didn't have that intimate connection. We were never inside looking out. We were never within each other in that respect. And so it's not that Jesus is kicking out the people because they didn't do it right. It's that they can't be a part of kingdom because they never realized it in their lives. They never got to that place of Ming, as Schafer is using it here. And then to finish off the section, from this vantage point, omniscience is seen to be a whole being knowing that makes 5 particularly aware of the porous transparency of all the walls that seem to separate individual beings. If the field of chi is like an ocean, 5s know it from a vantage point inside one of its droplets. Their special sensitivity is to intuitively realize that each drop is indistinguishable from the ocean itself. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Julian of Norwich, one of the famous mystics. And one of her visions was of a hazelnut that appeared in her hand, just a perfectly round little hazelnut, with which I'm sure she was intimately familiar. But the insight in that moment is that all of creation is in this hazelnut. And this hazelnut represents all of creation. And so you got the whole within the part and the part within the whole, and the part can reproduce the whole. And so there is this equivalency, between the part and the whole, and all is one, and all will be well, and all manner of thing will be well, right? If you're familiar with Julian. But it's the same kind of idea here. Fives know it from a vantage point inside. If the field of chi is like an ocean, then the fives know it from the vantage point inside one of the droplets. But the drop is indistinguishable from the ocean. The hazelnut is indistinguishable from all of creation. Okay, are these holy ideas making any sense to you?
It describes my sensual relationship with a book.
There you
Mm.
go, huh?
Yeah, it does. And I never consciously put words into it, but I was writing notes as you're reading it. But when I get a book, I like to feel the pages. I'll shuffle it. And I like to feel and the body, and I would smell it. And I like the feeling. And then when I read the book, especially if it's a novel, I actually go inside that world and live it.
Mhm. Dave, I wanted to offer something that made me think of this, and I think it applies. When I was working, I worked, for those that don't know, I worked at a fairly large medical device manufacturing company, and we saw many VIP tours, and everybody that did a tour around the company had their own perspective. There was like an HR perspective tour, an engineering tour, a management tour, and I'm thinking of this one gentleman, and he definitely, now I look back on him, he's had to have been a five. And he did the most interesting tour. He took us all to the back door in the warehouse to start. And he said, I want you to imagine that you're a part. You're coming in the door, being delivered as a part, this assembly part, whatever it is. And he took the tour, and we followed that part all the way through to full assembly of this instrumentation that we were producing on the production line, and out to the sales and delivery and shipment and whatnot. And to me, it was one of the best tours I had ever been to. And it just, I could visualize following that part all the way through until it was assembled and refined and checked and audited, and how it made the machinery work. And it was just really fabulous. And I'm thinking of that when you're speaking of this. It was just really kind of an interesting example.
That is a great example of what we're talking about. Now, here's someone who really knew his stuff, right? He
Mhm.
didn't know about it. He had lived it. He was part of it, and he could convey that to you in such a
Mhm.
great way. I love that.
Mhm.
Come alive. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of
Hmm.
came alive. Exactly.
Really
Yeah.
cool.
Mm.
How's this settling on you, Lori Five?
William's trying to say something. Are you muted, William?
Yes, I was.
I'll
Thank you.
answer that.
What I was saying, like your example there, Kathy, captures that idea of being the droplet in the ocean,
Mm.
right? Where you're having that internal perspective. I really like that.
Mhm. Yeah.
Hmm.
In answer to your question about how it's all hitting me, I'm not sure I'm a five if books are the requirement. I'm a student. I'm a student and I love to learn, but I'm not, I'm not into books.
Hmm.
So what I mean by that is I read essays, I read research, I read all kinds of stuff, but you know, maybe I'm not a five. I will also say that the knowing within the heart mind and knowing whatever's known from the inside, um, I get that.
Hmm.
And it made me think about, how we always talk about receiving Jesus. This goes back to your hazelnut. Not your hazelnut, but whatever, whoever's hazelnut. I was just thinking about, we talk about receiving Jesus, but this feels a little more like we're dimensionally inside Jesus in some way. And that feels more real to me, as being inside him, and that breath kind of moves through us. I don't know how to explain it, but receiving Jesus definitely does not communicate, what this is telling us, I think.
Yeah.
And I don't think being a bookworm is the criteria here.
Oh, no, of course not.
Yeah,
Of
of
course
I'm
course.
not.
not interested in everything, but what I'm interested in, I drown myself in it.
Yeah.
But I want to add, Lori, is that before books were invented,
What was a
fives are-
five then?
fives already existed, right?
I don't know.
Of course. No, of course. Fives exist.
Remember, Lori, he's only bringing up the book as an illustration for the difference between the yin energy
Yeah.
being solely lavished on social as opposed to mental. So he was just trying to make that distinction. He said, yeah, look at the way
Okay, good
fives
point.
typically, the relationship they have with the book, because it's about, receiving mentally rather than through the heart or through the body. Do you see yourself as a mental type? Your center of experience is primarily mental?
I think I'm mental and body, sort of both.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because no, that's not true. I mentally experience a place where I feel like I'm meeting Jesus within my body, but it's here. It's very bizarre. I don't know how to explain that. I would say more mental for sure.
Okay. And do you see yourself as more yin energy rather than yang, or reconciling?
I thought I was
Okay.
more yin.
All right. Well, then you're still in the five camp then.
Okay.
I mean, we're not saying you're definitely a five, but
Do I get a decoder ring?
yeah, we all need a decoder ring.
That's what too.
But just as we three fives are seeing how this particular coat fits, as we're reading through Schafer's rendition, those of you who are not, see how much is common to us all. I mean, this way of knowing is not exclusively for fives. This way of knowing is what Jesus says is the absolute requisite for being able to know God, to know the kingdom, to know anything, to know another person. It's that intimate experience. It's not just conceptual knowledge. It's not just subject object. That's why he said, unless you exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, you cannot enter the kingdom. Basically saying, unless you exceed this basic subject object, reward punishment type of relationship, there's no way that you can even conceive of what the kingdom actually means, and yet it already stands fully formed within you. That relationship, that you is already there and always has been, but it's hidden right now. It's shelved behind this wall of objectivity and this wall of different ways of processing things in an objective way. And so that's what we're trying to overcome in all of our spiritual journeys, regardless of what type we are, so and we're going to find that with every type that we read. It's going to be the same. I'm sorry, who did I cut off?
Sharon,
No.
could you just go over, since I wasn't there since the beginning, exactly what the yin and the yang energy is?
So the yang energy is very, very typically looked at as more masculine energy. Yin is looked at as more feminine. Yang is outwardly focused. It's something that's energetic, and it's executive in the sense that it does something, it creates something, it accomplishes things. Yin is more introspective. It would be more, so yang would be more like the straight rays of sun, and yin would be more like the curved energies of wind and water. And so it's going to be the nighttime introspection and consolidation, as opposed to the daytime activity. And so those are the basic ideas, and they're both
Thank you. That helped a
complementary.
lot.
Yeah, they're both complementary. Each one has a bit of the other in its symbol, And so we understand that it's not an either or, but it's an oscillation between the two. If that helps.
Thank you. Yes,
Okay.
Water and wind is definitely, that speaks to me.
Yeah, they're the curved energies as opposed to the straight energies.
Mm-hmm.
So introverts are going to typically be more yin-like and extroverts more yang-like, but it doesn't necessarily fall hard along those lines either. But these are the type of energies we're talking about. And then this reconciling energy is the attempt to balance the two. And so you've got those that are trying to balance the two energies. And so those are the three energy types as opposed to the three centers of experience, which is heart, mind, and body. And so these are all playing against the Enneatypes as well.
yeah, I definitely have both of those yin and yang.
What do you see yourself as? What type?
8.
8. Okay.
But I definitely have my 5 time too.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
All right, well, let's talk about the initial wounding. So again, these holy ideas in the first section of each one of these 9 discussions on the types, this is the ideal. This is what he would see the infant is experiencing before it has been differentiated, before it has been wounded, before it's been adulterated in any way. This would be the holy idea, in terms of its completely pure state. Now we're going to talk about, okay, what happens early in childhood to wound the 5, and how does that 5 Enneatype then develop from that initial wounding? So the failures of the holding environment in infancy threaten these sensitivities. Many 5s seem to experience a double failure of mothering. The first occurs with embodiment itself. They seem to feel that the very first entity to hold them, gravity, was an awkward mother, and that they have never been quite comfortable in her arms. Now, I certainly can't say I remember being at all at odds with gravity, but I think I get what he's saying here. Some of them, some 5s, additionally feel that their own parents were either invasive or not present. Either way, their experience was that they were never really held. Accordingly, many 5s grow up feeling emotionally unconnected to those around them. The resulting knothole is a sense of pervasive emptiness, surrounded by walls that seem too fragile either to contain the emptiness or to protect it from being exploited. So one of the things that I've realized, and contemplation really helped me start to put this together as I started practicing it a few decades ago, was that my parents were the type that were more not present. They weren't invasive, but they were aloof, benign, absolutely benign, cared for me and my sister, but they just weren't really there. My father wasn't the sportsman type. We didn't go camping. We didn't do this. We didn't do that. I remember him taking me to a ball game once. When I started playing City League baseball and got on the All-Star team, they actually came to a game, but they had never come to any of the regular season games, but they came to the All-Star game, and I was just thrilled because they were there. And so I remember feeling that way, that they weren't really present. And I never really thought of it being any way abusive or neglectful because I never wanted for anything. But I do know that I came out of childhood and adolescence with this intense need to try to fit in. Everything I did and every choice I made was to prove myself, to be able to do things that other people admired or accepted and approved of, and so on and so forth. So I can look back and say, hey, that had to have been an unconscious motivator for me, because look at the way that I lived my 20s, which turned out to be a disaster. And accordingly, many 5s grew up feeling emotionally unconnected to those around them, and the resulting knothole is a sense of pervasive emptiness. Now, how do I disentangle that from being an introvert? Is that going to be the same thing as part of the Enneatype? Because I'm obviously very introverted, and I'm probably on the front end of the spectrum, what used to be called Asperger's. So how do those things all relate? Do they relate? Do they necessarily always go together? I mean, these are things that are, difficult for me to try to disengage. I've always thought of my withdrawn nature and the inability for me to read social cues, especially as a child, was, due to my introversion. And then later on, I related it to Asperger's. I hadn't really thought of it about being related to a five until reading through this as being part of those same kinds of aspects. But, it's kind of interesting. But I do resonate and relate to a lot of what he's saying in that one paragraph.
Mhm. There is some overlap of mental health diagnoses based on the different types. So, for example, like a very unhealthy perfectionist might look like somebody with OCD, or a very unhealthy type 9 might look like somebody with a dissociative kind of personality or disorder. Um, and the fives, it's typical to see the Asperger's type
Mm.
uh, clusters in the unhealthy levels, basically.
Hmm.
Mm.
Mhm.
I can totally see that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think they can be seen as nerdish, which would put them in a category of maybe socially awkward at first, unless they're with
Yeah.
their nerd herds. They're probably all feeling very comfortable, but outside of that, they might not. So
The herd of nerds.
nerd.
But yeah,
Love
very
our nerds.
introverted, kind of like have specialty interests, like the goth people and their like the people who are into Star Wars and things of that nature. That kind of energy.
Mm.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Thankfully, I didn't have any of those things to glom onto at the time. So,
You just
We
had the
did have
Bible.
Batman back then, but that's not the same, I guess, right?
yeah, that didn't work the same way.
Not the same.
Didn't do the same thing.
Yeah, my son, definitely.
Yeah,
And
I'm
Star
thinking about that,
Trek,
Sharon. Absolutely.
all of the above.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And one of my son-in-laws on the Hawaiian end of my geographic plane here, Bryce. I mean, I can really connect to, accordingly, many fives grow up feeling emotionally unconnected to those around them. I find him very distant, and and maybe that's a mother thing, because I'm his mother-in-law,
Mhm.
and but he is a voracious reader. He's fascinated by the Enneagram. I think he identifies as a five,
Mhm.
and yet he's brilliant, you know. When he
Hmm.
was in college, I mean, he was bored.
Mhm.
And he he used to he told us a story one time that in college, a way for him to make money was to help um take the exams for his his student friends because he always got A's.
Whoa.
And he kind of sheepishly admitted, well, that's probably not something I'm proud of. But yeah, it was amazing. I mean, he was quite resourceful.
Mhm.
Oh, it still it very much is.
That's funny. And Judy, just from what I know of him through you, yeah, it totally seems to fit the profile.
Okay, now this is not the one on the East Coast. This is my Bryce
Hawaii.
from Hawaii.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Mhm.
right,
No, I know
Kauai.
who you're talking about. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking about him when he was all into agriculture and
Oh,
wasn't it
yeah.
agriculture and all that kind of that was really wonky stuff, as I recall.
Yes, it was a
Yeah.
global algae used as a
Yeah, exactly,
biofuel.
exactly. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, very much so.
Yes,
But then he got
that
bored
totally
with
fits.
that.
You did the wedding, right, Dave? Weren't you?
Yeah, you were at the wedding.
Yeah,
You
I
were,
was
yeah.
there.
Yeah, that's right. You bet. I forgot about that. That's true.
Yeah, I met him.
Yeah.
Okay, so to carry on, if this was your early experience, your initial defensive reaction was to withdraw.
Mm.
You hid in an attempt to protect yourself. You became preoccupied with boundaries. You became almost the reverse image of your fellow yin type, 9, for whom any boundary seems like an impenetrable wall. For you as a 5, it seemed that no boundary would ever be impermeable enough to keep you safe.
Oh.
The preoccupation with boundaries was the first distortion of holy transparency. In order to keep the boundaries secure, you learned to withdraw and to make do with less because that made you feel less dependent on others. The parsimony of your existence gave you a sense of safety, but it ultimately heightened your feelings of emptiness and separateness as well. If you don't know the word parsimony, it means poverty, it means impoverished. So going back, holy transparency refers to the perception that every individual being is totally and completely illuminated by that same original awareness. Okay? So the preoccupation with boundaries was the first distortion of holy transparency. So now, since the initial wounding is that you weren't really held, and so to protect yourself from that is that you set up boundaries and you withdraw. And then the preoccupation with those boundaries is the first distortion that every individual being is totally and completely illuminated by that same original awareness. And so you're breaking all that stuff down. The 5 is breaking all that stuff down. Starting from the initial wounding of not feeling held, not feeling connected with, or being intruded upon if it goes, because it can go both ways. For me, it was aloof parents. Maybe for Lori or Ellen, it was parents that were actually intrusive and invading that space. Hard to say. But either way, the solution for the 5 is to withdraw, set up walls, set up boundaries, stay safe, protect the resources, right? But the parsimony of your existence, in other words, the poverty of that kind of withdrawn, isolated existence, may give you a sense of safety, but it ultimately heightens your feelings of emptiness and separateness as well, of course. So you're starting into a feedback loop, basically, is what's happening. You weren't held to begin with, and so you try to protect yourself, and you're going to be less held in your own separate space that you create for yourself. And then that spurs the next round and so on and so forth. Turning the page. Under your disconnectedness from life lay a vague sense of guilt for not having known something. It is as though you believe that you had only, if you had only, wait, it is as though you believe that had you only known better, you would have been able to woo your parents better, so that they would know you with the same interiority with which you wanted to know them. The guilt over not knowing them led you down a lifelong quest to gather information and to attain knowledge. In this way, you attempted to recreate the lost essential quality of holy omniscience. Your emphasis, however, was primarily placed on attaining and owning rather than on adapting and utilizing knowledge. Moving out into the world with what you knew seemed too dangerous, for it could expose your inner life to others. Once you gathered the information for yourself, you felt little need to do much else with it. This represented a further distortion of receptive energy, from interior whole being knowing to a kind of intellectual withdrawal from real life. The disconnection from life also brought a disconnection from others' energy. Rather than exchanging energy with other people, you withdrew because you thought any exchange would drain your own energy. Thus, you experienced periods of feeling barely alive. This inner sense of running on dry tanks supported your emotional vice as a 5, which is called avarice or stinginess. Stinginess results from the choking off of your original receptive energy. It represents the 5's version of the inertia seen in all yin types when their energy becomes unbalanced. If you are a 5, when you are asked to reveal something about yourself or to engage emotionally with someone, your first instinct is probably to flee or to shut down. It feels as though granting the request will require too much time and energy and will expose you to being drained by the petitioner's demands. You have this feeling in part because you are so deeply aware of how any one piece of your being is connected to all the others. It seems that sharing any one part of yourself will inevitably require you to share and or give away everything else. Otherwise, you will have given the other person only a partial glimpse of who you are, and they may not understand it. They might come to false conclusions about you, and you might not ever know what those are. Thus, you end up paralyzed by the belief that you have only two choices. Either you conceal yourself and give nothing away, or you tell all and offer everything. This is just another version of the law of inertia. It operates similarly to that of nines who can't get started once they're at rest and have a hard time stopping once they're in action. You know, I was reading this and I'm thinking,
Oh,
did I do this? You know, I'm trying to remember, and something came to mind. In my early 20s, I had a girlfriend, and I was doing exactly this. I was putting up the boundaries. I was putting up the walls. I was keeping our relationship in a compartment. And she always wanted to talk about the relationship and try to expand it further. And I remember thinking this totally, you know, why does she always pick the times when I'm most exhausted to open a conversation like this? And now I realize I was exhausted because she was asking me the question.
Yes.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
but I can remember I could not even keep my eyes open. I couldn't even think. I was so exhausted. I kept thinking, why does she always pick the worst times to want to preach these subjects? And it was just the opposite way around. So there is something to all of that.
Yeah.
I know for me, I know me, even now, I have very, very strong boundaries.
Mhm.
Mm.
Um, like the other colleagues I have, oh yeah, let's look at the labs. I go, no, it's 5 o'clock. I'm not gonna look at the labs. That can wait for tomorrow. And I very, very, very rarely mesh my personal life with my business life. So I have some colleagues, they use their iPhone, their cell phone, to be messaged by the specialist. I refuse. I say, oh, don't you have the Volt Messenger? I go, nope, I don't want to. I do not want to be messaged, even though I'm not, let's say I'm the primary care provider. But to me, you're the specialist. You do what you need to do. I will look at the message tomorrow.
I'm not that good.
Yeah, yeah, oh, I'm good. Yeah.
But I have been called a hermit by my children.
Oh.
And it's the description you have about emotionally disconnected or unconnected. That's my parents. I've never felt unloved, but there is that emotional unconnectedness.
Yeah.
I think because they have to work to survive, and all of us were like little animals just roaming around the house and the environment. We fended for ourselves. I think that's why we became very independent. And and talking about boundaries and others. And I remember when somebody says, "Oh, let's go do this," I can easily say yes or no because it has to be on my terms. And I remember this one girl in college. But Ellen, let's go here. You say you go. I go, no, I don't want to. So it's my terms whether I want to go or not. So she was disappointed. But you see, I didn't care. It's on my terms that I want to go or not. Yeah. And I escape in the world of books. Those were my companions. Oh, yep,
There it is.
there it is. But I found my other nerd people now that I'm in great book discussions. Oh my gosh, we discuss. It's supposed to be 2 hours. We can go on. It's just like this.
Ellen, did you ever feel maybe in your younger years that sense of emptiness and separateness? Did you read
Separateness, yes, but not emptiness.
on emptiness? Okay.
It's probably because I found, how do you say it, an outlet, or the books were my companions, the characters.
Okay.
I remember reading Lord of the Flies.
Oh, that was
I loved it. I was in that world.
mm, mm,
You know how some people will be in their video games or what else? The movies. I had it in the books.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Russ Hudson talks about this idea of like when we feel emotionally wounded or like that emotional emptiness, we can retreat to the safety of the mind.
Mm.
Mm.
And it's like if you live in your head, you might not experience that emotional disconnection, right? Like you have
Mm.
knowledge.
Like
Mhm.
you
And
have a rich fantasy life, maybe kind of
yeah,
thing,
Yeah.
or living
yeah,
in an abusive situation or
Mhm.
something. Yeah.
yeah. Or you got some other book you can grab or some new source of knowledge you can fill that void with.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But see, that's also one of the hallmarks of being on the spectrum is that our interior lives are richer even than our exterior lives. You know,
Right.
it's just so loud, it's so real, it's so there, and it just takes
Mhm.
over. And I remember certainly experiencing that, you know, either just in my own imagination or in the books I was reading or my maps of the solar system or whatever it was I was obsessing over at the time, you know.
Mhm.
But that interior life, and I see that in my sons too, especially our youngest, you know, his interior world is really, really present. And so it kind of takes over. And that's where, you know, the balance has to start coming in. Um, but that takes a certain amount of awareness to even see that,
Mhm.
or a certain amount of pain, you know, that of being, you know, either bullied or teased or, you know, just disapproved and unaccepted, that eventually that you will try to find a way to connect um,
Mhm.
physically with others.
Mhm.
You know, Dave, I may have mentioned this before. I live with five, and so I'm reading this, thinking about a lot of these things. And I know for my David, he came from a Jewish family, and his mother was very overpowering, more so. He loved her. He did love her, but he said he felt smothered by her a lot. So I think he was just that overly, the Jewish mama just really always wanting to hug him and touch him, and he felt I didn't like that. So I think he learned probably at a young age too to retreat. He was
Mhm.
the oldest also, so that probably goes to mom being very attached to the oldest, kind of a thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
So he did feel the opposite of not the aloofness, but it was more, I need to retreat to my safe, quiet place because
So
that
that
was
was the
not,
intrusiveness
it
that
was more
Schaefer
intrusive
was
for
talking
him.
about. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's just,
Whether,
that could just be
whereas
cultural.
Ellen and I experienced more of the aloofness.
Right. And that could just be cultural because I could see a Jewish mom being very hands-on and just,
Yeah.
lovey and dovey, and maybe other cultures being very different. So
Right.
could,
Yeah, like a Chinese father is not lovey-dovey.
Mhm.
Chinese mom, no.
Oh.
We don't hug. We don't,
Maybe
yeah.
more stoic, no touching and
Yeah.
things like
Mhm.
that. Yeah.
As
And I
I
was thinking of like Jewish scholars and bookworms and people who are into, like spiritual Jewish people are like really into text and
Like
reading.
Dave, you mean? Maybe just a little.
Just a little bit.
But now all the rest of you non-five types, be
Yeah,
processing along with this because this is
Yeah,
not exclusive to fives.
yeah.
We all had parents. They were either intrusive or they were aloof or they were somewhere in between, and that
Mhm.
affected us in all these ways, and that sense of not being held, that sense of not being, the center of the universe is going to play out in our own characteristic ways. But it's
Yeah.
not that even this description here, although it's for fives, is not going to be exclusive to fives. And
Mhm.
all of this is good information for us to know. The whole point here is to know thyself, right? That's
Mhm.
what we're trying to do here. We want to know what it is that makes us tick. What is the engine that is really driving our particular train? That is in the unconscious, because as long as it's in the unconscious, it's going to keep motoring on that track. The only way we're going to get it on a different track is if we bring that up into the conscious so that we can then be aware of it in real time at the point of decision making. And as we start making decisions in different directions over time and repeatedly, that's where the transformation takes place.
Mm.
And so that's what we're trying to do here. So take all of this in, it's because you're going to see yourself in all of these pages.
Yeah.
Can I add something? It's kind of digressing it, but it's when Kathy said it's cultural. I remember I had an acquaintance during college. So she's Japanese. She was going through a divorce, and she was married to a white person. She lost custody of her child because in the court, they're saying, look how she doesn't hug the child. She doesn't do this. She doesn't do this, whereas the father does. So she lost custody. So
Mm,
this is a loving mother, but it was perceived as what, cold or aloof or not
mm,
nurturing.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So
mm.
that is the consequence of that bias we have in the cultural frame.
Mm.
Yeah. Anyway, I
Yep.
digress.
That was a good little diversion.
Yeah.
I like that one.
Mhm.
Let's go ahead and finish this section so we got a clean place to start next week. On page 85, the inertia of stinginess. So this is what we're talking about. The vice of the fives is avarice or stinginess. The inertia of stinginess inevitably left you with the feeling that you were living in a parched desert with barely enough supplies to keep life going. So your natural instinct was to collect, hoard, and accumulate. The paradox was that though you consciously thought yourself detached, you were in fact taking pride in your ability to make do with so little. You were probably quite unaware that your primary attachment was actually to feeling detached. This attachment had become the ultimate distortion of your soul's original yin receptivity. Once again, I turn to Rabindranath Tagore for a description of your dilemma. He paints for us a picture of one who knows but cannot make contact. I know thee as my God and stand apart. I do not know thee as my own and come closer. I know thee as my Father and bow before thy feet. I do not grasp thy hand as my friends. I stand not where thou comest down and ownest myself as thyself as I stand not where thou comest down and ownest thyself as mine, there to clasp thee to my heart and take thee as my comrade. Thou art the brother amongst my brothers, but I heed them not. I divide not my earnings with them, thus sharing my all with thee. In pleasure and in pain, I stand not by the side of men, and thus stand by thee. I shrink to give up my life, and thus do not plunge into the great waters of life.
Mhm.
And so here we have a picture of someone who is trying to ride the fence, right? And is not ready and willing to commit in any direction. So this is the dilemma of the wounded five, the one who is setting up boundaries and trying to hoard the energy that they're afraid that's going to be completely dissipated if they just take their finger out of the dike. It's going to just start the floodwaters and they're going to lose it all. And so to that fear of that is what's keeping all of this in place for as long as it does.
Can I say something?
Yes, you may.
Um, I very much identify with this, this making do with so little, and also feeling so afraid that I'm going to be completely devoured. That my energy will be consumed. And I wrote down a long time ago while we were reading that being drained, I'm starting to realize this, that being drained isn't the same thing as being annihilated. That I can have an outflow of my energy, even uncomfortably so, but I'm not being destroyed.
Mm.
I mean, it's the little steps, right?
Yeah, I very much relate to that idea, and I think I might, if I'm not a 9, I'm definitely a 5. Like I can relate to that idea of feeling drained by that, and trying to hold on to that emotional energy,
Yeah.
and I'm quite capable of being in social situations, but I very much enjoy when it's over, where I can
Yeah,
go.
the trap is when you expose yourself over and over again and over again to being drained. It's part
Mhm.
of your work, it's part of our compulsion,
Yeah.
to serve and to do. And
Mhm.
but for me, it's like I don't want to I can make do with so little, I can continue to give to other people until I myself have
Right.
nothing.
Right.
It's a crazy loop.
Mhm. Mhm. And I think you'll see the connections with this triangle, right? Like the giver at type 2, the
Yeah.
the boss on 8, and then the avarice on,
The boss, I gotta check that out.
yeah. Mm.
Yeah, the relationships geometrically within the Enneagram are fascinating, aren't they? Especially broken down this way.
Mm.
It really is interesting.
Mm.
Cool.
Okay. Any last concepts, burning desires, thoughts?
Talking about accumulating and hoarding, I hoard and accumulate, and I spoke with some of the people in my book discussion group, and I said, "Oh, do you know that term tundoku?" And some of them do know it. It's a Japanese term that says you accumulate books intending to read them. There's even a cartoon of a man. It is, and he reminds me of my brother-in-law John,
Mm.
heavyset man in front of the computer typing that says and ordering books saying, but it's only 99 cents. I totally
Mm.
identify with him, and I spoke with other people, and they have bookshelves and bookshelves of books,
Yeah.
and so do I.
Yeah. I've got
Yeah, you too?
them. Yeah.
Yeah, see? It's
They
called
were on the
Sudoku.
they were on the to-do list. Like
Yeah.
Yeah,
like
right.
I mean, when we were in my doctoral program and they were assigning so many books and papers and so on, like we knew at certain points we'd never be able to read this stuff, so we just kept them
Mhm.
as references.
Mhm.
Where you can pull them off and find things. But I haven't read 2/3 of the books on my bookshelf.
Yeah.
I have several, but even the lady I was sitting next to, I said to her, "Yeah, in our lifetime we intend to," and she said, "Yes, in my lifetime of 210 years." That's the point. We're never going to read it.
Mhm.
I remember my pastoral mentor when I was going through the training and we are studying all this, just like you were saying, William, we're studying all this and all this and all this and all this stuff's coming down. And he said, you know what, don't worry. You don't have to remember all of this stuff. You have to remember where it is on your shelf.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Same idea. Same idea.
Yep.
I don't have a Kindle. I don't want to. I refuse. I refuse to read in a Kindle.
Computer.
Kindles are good for airplanes.
Yeah.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
That's where I use my Kindles or doctor's office.
All right. This was a great discussion. We'll pick up right here next week and maybe we'll have some honorary fives. We're already persuading William over to the dark side. So let's see if any of you else come as well. All right. Okay, Scotty.
Thank you, Father, for this time together and all the things we learn and we play with each other and we argue with each other and debate with each other. We have so many different interactions at different levels that it's enjoyable. It gives flavor and texture to our lives, and we're grateful for it. We're grateful for the things that you've made clear and you continue to make clear as we go through our journey in life. So thank you, Lord, and thank you for just loving us the way you do. We're eternally grateful. We feel your blessings when we stay connected to you. And we can tell how much you love us. And it's mind-boggling, Lord. But we're grateful. So thank you for this time and thank you for all that you do with us and all that is allowed to have us incur and experience in the safety of your loving arms. We love you, Lord. It's in your holy and precious name, Lord Jesus, that we pray and we give our thanks. We say our amens. Amen.
Amen.
You got
All
it?
right, everyone, don't forget this Friday is Good Friday. We start at 7 o'clock with our Good Friday gathering. If you're local, come join us. If not, you can stream us and tune in. And of course, Easter Sunday starting at 10 a.m. on Sunday. So we're approaching the end of Holy Week. So here we go. Thanks for the discussion tonight. We'll see you soon.
You got it.
Okay, good
Take care,
night.
guys.
Everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night,
Thanks.
everybody.
Thank you,
Happy.
Joanna.
Good
See
night.
you Friday.
Take care.
Good night. Yeah, Jordana, see you Friday, dear.
What time does Ron have to be there?
5:30.
Okay, I'll let him know.
Yeah. We want to be able to start playing at 5:30, so getting there a little before then.
Okay, I'll let him know.
Thank you, sweetie. Okay.
See ya.
Bye,
Dave,
everybody.
Bye.
Dave, that question that I had for you that with